The Wehrmacht burned 300,000 tons of petroleum every month. This hydrocarbon deficit in the summer of 1942 set the vector of the German offensive south. Why did this exact coordinate on the map become the target? Supplying motorized units required uninterrupted access to oil. The daily fuel consumption of German motorized forces in 1942 demanded the immediate capture of Caucasian deposits. Operation Blue began. Command split Army Group South into two vectors. Group A targeted the extraction infrastructure. Group B pushed toward the Volga River. Oil meant survival. Resource capture. The structural integrity of both armies depended entirely on fuel logistics. The Soviet command recognized the resource threat. They built a structural barrier. The metallic clack of typewriter keys echoed in the bunker. A clerk typed the exact text of Order 227. Not one step back. Commanders deployed blocking detachments along the rear perimeters, while officers positioned heavy machine guns directly behind the shallow infantry trenches. The directive fixed the defensive grid. They dug in. Retreat meant death. Assault groups advanced to their designated starting coordinates. Executing the summer directive to secure the Volga, armored formations reached the city limits. It was August 23, 1942. The 6th Army under Friedrich Paulus and the 4th Panzer Army commanded by Hermann Hoth initiated the breach. Aerial bombardment commenced immediately. The Luftwaffe dropped over 1,000 tons of munitions within the first 48 hours of the operation. Blast waves shattered the structural integrity of residential blocks. Brick facades collapsed into the streets. The grid layout vanished. Rubble blocked the thoroughfares. Urban infrastructure systematically transformed into a layered defensive terrain. German ground units advanced into the northern industrial suburbs. They encountered anomalous ballistic resistance. Soviet crews lowered the elevation of their anti-aircraft guns to zero. They fired high-velocity flak shells on a flat trajectory directly at the advancing armor. The static positions disabled 80 tanks before German infantry overran the sectors. The mechanized spearheads maintained momentum. Assault units severed the Soviet defensive lines. They reached the riverbank. Soviet command funneled reinforcements across the water under continuous artillery fire. The operational footprint shrank. By November, German forces held 90% of the city grid. Aerial bombardment shattered the city infrastructure, creating a flawless topological maze for ultra-close infantry engagements. How do you neutralize an overwhelming advantage in the air? You shrink the engagement distance to a bare minimum. Soviet commanders ordered their units to hug the enemy lines. They kept the buffer zone under 50 meters. Luftwaffe dive bombers became useless. A strike on Soviet positions meant hitting their own infantry. The fighting shifted below ground. A 5-man assault squad waded through a flooded sewer main. They positioned 20 kilograms of explosives directly beneath a reinforced concrete ceiling. The detonation shattered the floor above. It buried the German machine gun nest in seconds. Thick clouds of concrete dust and the sharp stench of cordite filled the unventilated basements. Breathing became impossible. Here, the Soviet PPSH-41 submachine gun dictated the outcome. The weapon cycled at 900 rounds per minute. This provided a critical statistical advantage at ranges under 30 meters. The front line dissolved into vertical layers. Germans held the 3rd floor. Soviets controlled the 2nd. Germans counterattacked on the ground floor. They called this combat model Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. Every room demanded a brutal clearance operation, with fragmentation grenades and sharpened entrenching tools. Landmarks vanished. The central railway station changed hands 13 times in a single 24-hour period. Supply chains fractured. Troops scavenged ammunition from the dead. The dense ruins offered unlimited firing vectors for marksmen. Camouflaged in the debris, snipers paralyzed entire infantry companies. Vasily Zaitsev eliminated over 200 targets using a standard Mosin Nagant rifle. His weapon featured a basic 3.5 power optical sight. The close quarters erased all standard infantry tactics. By late autumn, standard Soviet assault groups suffered a 70% casualty rate during a single building clearance operation. Assault groups burned resources in the center. On November 19th, the operational vector shifted. Soviet armored units hit the weakened flanks. Tu-34 tanks spearheaded Operation Uranus. Tracks crushed Romanian artillery positions. The pincers converged. The ring closed. 300,000 Axis soldiers lost their supply lines. The perimeter geometry collapsed. General Paulus drafted an urgent radiogram. He requested an immediate breakout. Static hissed through the receiver. Hitler denied the withdrawal. The order promised total aerial resupply. The encircled group required 700 tons of daily cargo. Maximum theoretical transport capacity reached only 300 tons. The numbers failed. Junkers 52 aircraft lacked the payload. Blizzards grounded the transport squadrons. Ice covered the runways. Consumption outpaced delivery. Reserves vanished. Quartermasters distributed the last intact rations and registered a critical deficit across all essential resource categories. The trap closed. Saving the 300,000-man group demanded an immediate mechanized breakthrough under Field Marshal Manstein. Did command possess sufficient motorized reserves to breach the ring? Panzer divisions advanced eastward, but momentum degraded rapidly. The armor halted exactly 48 kilometers from the target. External logistical intervention failed. Inside the pocket, the defensive perimeter shrank daily. Commanders abandoned the final operational airstrip at Potomnik. Transport aircraft dropped marginal supply loads over hostile territory. Ammunition stocks reached absolute zero. Tank engines ran dry. Heating fuel vanished. By January 1943, the structural collapse accelerated. Soviet forces executed Operation Ring. Heavy artillery severed the German defense grid into disjointed sectors. While the original encircled group numbered 300,000 troops, barely 90,000 men remained alive inside the shattered perimeter. Combat effectiveness evaporated. Isolated groups began to surrender. Manstein's armor halted in January. The encircled force immediately shifted to its internal, exhausted reserves. A quartermaster picks up a knife. He cuts a hardened block of rations. The blade scrapes against wood grain. The bread is heavily mixed with sawdust. A soldier swallows the gray mass. His core temperature plummets. Frostbite rapidly destroys the cellular tissue in his fingers and toes. The ambient temperature dropped to -30 degrees. In this extreme thermal environment, basic human metabolism demands over 4,000 kilocalories a day just to prevent hypothermia. Logistics officers slashed the daily bread allotment from 300 down to a fraction, 100 grams. This yielded less than 500 kilocalories. The human body began consuming its own muscle mass to generate heat. The logistical supply chain flatlined. Troops slaughtered over 20,000 transport horses before the year even ended. Then they boiled leather harnesses for broth. Biological degradation accelerated. Severe malnutrition shut down immune systems. Typhus infected the basement bunkers. Medical logistics completely failed. Field hospitals devolved into dark triage zones. The sharp clank of metal surgical instruments echoed across freezing cellars. Doctors amputated necrotic limbs entirely without anesthesia. The military structure underwent total physiological collapse. Starving men turned to unspeakable sources of protein among the frozen dead. Yet Berlin refused to acknowledge the physical disintegration of its troops. Radio directives offered no retreat. Command strictly forbade surrender. Thermal degradation at -30 degrees processed more than just military units. The blockaded civilian sector experienced identical physiological decay. Was there a chance for evacuation? Transport networks collapsed early. The operational perimeter locked down before the main mass of people could leave the combat zone. Municipal infrastructure ceased functioning completely. Food distribution systems failed. Water pipes froze. Survival demanded immediate physical adaptation. Women shaved their heads. Steel blades scraped hair down to the bare scalp. This visual modification simulated a male profile, statistically lowering the probability of targeted assaults by frontline personnel. Mortality metrics accelerated. 40,000 non-combatants perished inside the isolated urban grid. Unprotected groups absorbed collateral fragmentation from dual-sided artillery strikes. Caloric deficit and thermal drain eliminated the rest. Basic hydration required extreme risk. Civilian remnants crawled across open debris fields to extract ice under continuous crossfire. By the time the ceasefire took effect, the urban environment housing those 40,000 remaining residents had physically ceased to exist. Structural erasure reached 99%. The grid collapsed. Buildings became pulverized masonry. The infrastructure audit recorded total structural failure. Shattered concrete buried all primary transit routes. The massive volume of construction debris and unexploded ordnance paralyzed the terrain. Engineers required over 10 years to clear the sector. Only after this phase did full-scale reconstruction begin. Demographic depletion matched the physical ruin. Decades after the war, preserved rubble zones still interrupted the rebuilt city sectors. Out of an initial population of 500,000, the final rescue operations extracted exactly 1,500 survivors. The civilian grid yielded just 1,500 survivors from 500,000 residents. The military collapse generated a different demographic anomaly. Soviet commanders consolidated the surrendering units into a massive convoy of 91,000 men. Months earlier, the German 6th Army operated as an unmatched mechanized spearhead. Now, the capitulating infantry stood in the snow as freezing, emaciated remnants. What percentage of this contingent returned? Only 5,000 men survived the system. They returned 11 years after the war ended. The processing logistics began on January 31st. General Friedrich Paulus bypassed the direct hold-ground directive from Berlin. He transmitted the surrender protocol from a blocked basement headquarters. The extraction initiated immediately. Soviet guards formed the disarmed troops into columns. The prisoners began a forced pedestrian transit across the frozen steppe. The marching distance to the Beketovka transit hub exceeded 20 kilometers. Temperatures remained critically below freezing. Anyone failing to maintain the pace received a fatal gunshot. Guards left the corpses in the snow. The logistics chain distributed the surviving workforce across deep inland industrial zones. Inside the Soviet labor camps, the relentless mechanical hum of heavy mining equipment dictated the new daily rhythm. Men extracted coal and iron ore. The demographic erasure was complete. The mortality rate among the prisoners exceeded 94%. This extreme attrition did not stem solely from the harsh transit conditions. It resulted directly from the cumulative physiological depletion of the organism prior to the surrender. During the final weeks of the siege, the daily caloric intake had dropped below 500 calories. Starvation and typhus had already compromised their cellular integrity. Human bodies simply shut down. The processing eliminated the invasion force. The retreat ended in Berlin.